Having surpassed 1,000 completed anime, it's time to review my old favorites and find out what holds up. I'm Sacrabolic, your envoy of hope, and this is Anime Favorite Search. Koyomimonogatari is a 12-episode anime where the episodes are, according to Mal at least, 12 episodes long. If that is true, I'm not 100% sure, but I will tell you the episode length is actually pretty close to that. The name Koyomimonogatari obviously comes from the protagonist, Koyomi Araragi, but interestingly, the name Koyomi literally means and is written as calendar. So it's sort of a pun on a Koyomi story, but also a sort of calendar story, as I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is true, but I could be wrong about this. I believe each episode takes place in a different month. That might be wrong, though, so take that with a grain of salt. Regardless, each episode is a little bit of a short story that sort of gives us a supernatural premise or event or conversation that Araragi is having with a character, and then we usually get some sort of half-formed resolution around this. The purpose of Koyomimonogatari is mostly to fill in little bits of gaps and pieces of story that you can basically imply have had happened at some point. Sometimes it comes about to give a little bit more perspective on the girls that are sometimes more or less developed, but regardless, each one is its own self-contained story, except for a little bit of the last two episodes, and even them, they are pretty self-contained, and each episode involves Koyomi Araragi interacting with one of the major girls of the series. I would say, except for I believe there is no dedicated Sodachi episode, which makes sense because she sort of moved away and he only really had 3 interactions with her, but basically everyone else gets their own dedicated episode, even Kaganui, even Izuku Gaien. It basically touches on everyone. So, starting off with, Koyomi Stone is a short arc where we learn that there is a shrine on the outskirts of the school that Hanakawa and Araragi go to, and Hanakawa offers the story of the shrine, which did not exist 2 years ago when they both first started, to Oshino as sort of thanks for helping out during the events of the Vamp arc. And the crux of this, like many of the other Koyomimonogatari stories, is a little bit of a story, a little bit of a tale of an oddity, where the characters just try and solve a little bit of a micro mystery. And this is one of the earliest points in the timeline, in that this is actually threaded between the events of Kizu Monogatari and Neko Monogatari. So yeah, there's not too much going on with it, but it is an amusing little short story. Koyomi Flowers is a simple arc about Koyomi telling Senjogahara that one of the ways to pay off Oshino is if you can tell him interesting stories. And so she notices that there's flowers on the side of the road and remembers that when she was up on the roof when they started school, there was flowers on the roof, implying that someone had died on the roof. This arc itself is pretty lackluster. I don't really feel like it adds anything to the narrative, and I'm struggling to place anything in that occurs in it that actually stands out. There is a nice little sequence in it where Koyomi spins Senjogahara around like they're dancing right before she walks into the road, but as best I can remember, outside of maybe a clever line towards the end, there's nothing really to this one. Koyomi Sand takes place shortly after the Tsubasa Cat arc, and it involves Araragi telling Mayoi that Oshino has left the city officially, where Mayoi reveals to him that she was actually collecting stories to sell off to Oshino because Araragi's still like 5 million yen in debt to him, but Araragi actually reveals he already paid off the debt, which is an interesting little story beat that I don't think ever comes back into play in any of the later parts, but it is interesting to note, and I guess it's sort of, because Koyomimonogatari takes place further in the release order, than a lot of other entries. It almost like ties a bow on a plot thread that you would have expected to have been dropped. Regardless, it seems like Mayoi was collecting stories to tell to Oshino, one of which is that there is a sand box in a public park that just seems to turn into the face of a demon. The sand looks like a demon face, and no matter how much it gets played with or messed around with, it always settles back into the face of a demon. So the arc itself is sort of about exploring what's going on with the sandbox. It's the basic Koyomimonogatari setup where you get the mystery, and then Koyomi confronts someone, and then we get the resolution to the mystery. And like usual, the answer happens to be fairly mundane. What actually threw me for a loop in Koyomi-san is that we get to see Hanekawa with short hair in this, and I could have sworn Hanekawa's hair gets cut during the Tsubasa Tiger arc, and not this early, because I for whatever reason, I thought I remembered her actually cutting her hair. Completely misremembered that. Yeah, so we get to see short-haired Hanekawa for the first time in this, and it's actually kind of surprising, but other than that, I guess there isn't so much going on with the sand arc. Koyomi Water is about Koyomi going over to Kambaru's house and basically just cleaning up her book Avalanche, and she invites him over for dinner but says he has to take a bath first, where she tells him the story about how when her dad was younger, he saw the face of his future wife reflected in the pool of the water of the bath. And so there's a little bit of a mystery element about what's going on with the water of the bath. As usual with Koyomimonogatari, the explanation appears to be rather mundane. And this is, although a decent enough episode and you do get Kanbaru fan service, I will say that this is sort of one of the least relevant of the Koyomimonogatari episodes. I would say the biggest thing this episode does is that Araragi says that Senjougahara wouldn't kidnap him, and Kanbaru says, I don't know, it might happen. And yeah, I guess there's some foreshadowing in that, but this was actually written after season 2, so it's like retroactive foreshadowing. It's, I guess, a sort of, you could call it dramatic irony as far as presentation goes, but from my perspective, watching it in chronological order, it's foreshadowing. Koyomi Wind takes place the day after the Karin B arc ends, where Koyomi is speaking to Nadeko and explaining how Kayaki Deshu spread the rumors throughout the town that caused her to initially get cursed by snakes. This is also a little bit of a fan service episode where I will say that Nadeko looks adorable as always. There's a solid focus on her feet in this, so that's there if you enjoyed that. And really, it's just him musing like, well, how did he possibly spread it? And then at the end, we see Araragi and Shinobu speaking to Kayaki Deshu. Araragi speaking to Kayaki. Shinobu's just eating a donut the whole time, where he explains how he did it and how he specifically targeted charms that would work on middle school girls. He also alludes to the idea that there is, before a moment of chaos, a sort of empty darkness, which I think is, in a way, a reference to what would have, when this was releasing, the impending events of Owari Monogatari Season 2, and what goes down with that. I will say, I do not remember the scene where Araragi, Shinobu, and Kayaki are all sitting in a donut restaurant. Outside of this moment, so I'm going to have to keep an eye on when the fuck the second scene of this occurs going forward. But yeah, other than that, I think outside of alluding to probably Owari Season 2, there wasn't anything too much in Koyomi Wind. Koyomi Tree is about Karin asking Araragi for help with a tree that appeared in the training field in her city dojo. Apparently no one noticed it and it just sort of sprouted up out of nowhere, and all of the other students think it's kind of creepy and want to cut it down, whereas Karin herself actually wants to keep it there. So she asks her big brother how to save it. And of course, Araragi immediately goes to Hanekawa and asks how to save it. They do this by spreading a rumor, which is honestly, I just realized this while recording this, very similar to the concept that Kaeki Deshu brings up during the Koyomi Wind arc about how you target young girls who are more likely to spread stories when there is an opportunity that arises. I just made that connection. I was actually about to say that I don't think this arc connects very well to any of the other story arcs, but actually it does, and it further proves the connections between, I suppose, Koyomi and Kaeki, although I will say that the rumor idea was actually Hanekawa, so maybe I'm reading into things a little bit more than I should be. What I will say, though, is in a very Kaeki-like way, Hanekawa says that she doesn't feel right about lying in order to save the tree, where Araragi points out that lying to save the tree isn't necessarily a lie because they don't necessarily know that they're lying, even if what they're saying is statistically unlikely, and also that by lying about the tree, they may end up, in fact, turning the tree into an actual oddity that will actually protect the dojo, just like they claim that the tree is already an oddity that protects the dojo. Very, very Kaeki-esque on this. Honestly, the first several times I've watched this series, I never picked up on all of these connections between Araragi and Kaeki, and it is literally a fucking game changer. Regardless, this arc does mostly feel like it is an arc designed to bring in Karin to Koyomimonogatari, because Koyomimonogatari feels like it has this need to at least briefly touch on all of the main girls in the series, although I don't think it actually touches on Sodachi, but I will keep my eye out going forward. Koyomi Tea involves Tsukihi coming to Araragi with the information that there's supposed to be an 8th member of her tea club that's supposedly a ghost that lives in the club room. Despite the fact that she has systematically and logically refuted the existence of this 8th member, none of the other club members believe her that there is no 8th member, and they all insist that there is an 8th ghost member of this tea club. So she comes to Araragi for advice on how to get them believe that there is, in fact, no 8th ghost member. This arc, even more so than Koyomi Tree, feels like it's an arc that exists solely because they needed a way to give Tsukihi her own arc. I don't actually think this one at all really connects to anything else. He goes to Kambaru for help for this one. I was going to say that might mean that in every of the Koyomimonogatari, that means that Araragi goes to a different person for help, but no, he's gone to Hanekawa for help at least twice that I can remember off the top of my head. So I guess not even that's true, but every episode is focused usually on a different girl. So yeah, I would say this is definitely there just for the purposes of having a Tsukihi arc. I guess it gives you a little bit more about what she does in her free time, and I guess it touches a little bit on the relationship between the siblings. But even as far as that goes, I think that the Tsukihi Phoenix arc managed to do that better. So as far as the Koyomimonogatari arcs go, I think Koyomi Tea is probably the weakest so far. Koyomi Mountain arc involves Araragi and Ogi traveling up to the mountain with the Shirohebi Shrine. And we get Ogi giving a little bit of a history lesson to Araragi about how the shrine was originally in another location and they moved it. She poses to Araragi a sort of mystery on how they managed to move the shrine up the mountain without there being a path and without creating any sort of elaborate construction projects to move it. This is later resolved by Nadeko, who just points out that they probably just used the trees at the top of the mountain to build the shrine, which sort of brings up a Ship of Theseus problem, which Araragi points out. But the crux of it is they just moved the objects of worship and took the name, probably why this would be the North Shirohebi Shrine, rather than the other one probably was the South one. Regardless, there isn't really too much to this. This is sort of a arc designed to sort of color in some missing pages between what happens in the Nadeko Medusa arc. Mostly just explaining, I think, Nadeko's association with the snake beyond what it was already there for, and I think setting up the concept of a second shrine in the town. This is very much just there to fill some lore gaps. I don't think there's anything too spectacular about this one. I will say that if you're watching in chronological order, though, that this is actually sort of a fantastic build-up to the second half of the Nadeko Medusa arc. Koyomi Taurus is one of those arcs that sort of only exists because Koyomimonogatari needs to hit every girl, and this is basically the dedicated Shinobu arc. This one isn't really important in the grand narrative of anything, and I'm not really gonna say that I think there was any, vast foreshadowing or anything in it. It's just sort of a simple, cute arc where we get to see a little bit of an interaction between Araragi and Shinobu. Basically, Senjougahara makes a bunch of donuts, I believe 5 in total, and brings them over to Araragi during December for a sort of cheering him on while he studies. Now, here's the thing about this. They do point out that Shinobu has never interacted with Senjougahara, which is fucking wild to think about and something I never noticed until pointed out in this episode. But yeah, those two characters have literally never spoken. It's fucking crazy. I think they're the only characters that have never spoken. Actually, yes, they are. I was about to say, I'm not sure if Kanbaru was ever talking to Shinobu, but she did at one point, yeah. So, weirdly, never interacted. Then again, Senjougahara doesn't typically interact with the supernatural anymore anyway, outside of whenever Kaeki Deshu shows up or the Medusa arc. Regardless, they end up in a situation where Shinobu wants to eat these fucking donuts. And so what ends up happening is that Shinobu says that she could hide the donuts so that Araragi can't find them inside of his bedroom. I'm pretty sure it has to be specifically inside of his bedroom. And she uses this to make a little dig on him about how poorly he ended up hiding the talisman given to him by Izuko that ended up getting stolen by Nadeko. Anyway, I think I lost my train of thought at one point. Yeah. So, it is inconceivable to think that Araragi has not at least brought up the concept of Shinobu and told some things about Shinobu to Senjougahara. So, we have a situation where there's no way I believe that Senjougahara is not aware of Shinobu's love of donuts. Also, it is worth noting that we found out in the Medusa arc that Shinobu is not active until 10 p.m. So, we have a definitive time frame for this, which means Senjougahara, in order to cheer up her boyfriend, who she knows is tied to a vampire who loves donuts, specifically waited until that vampire was awake to bring him donuts. She kicked a fucking hornet's nest on purpose. There is zero way, I believe, that Senjougahara was not smart enough to have intentionally caused this scenario. Regardless, Shinobu ends up hiding the donuts around the house, Araragi has to find them, and then he only ends up finding 3 of them. Shinobu ate one of them. We already knew that. And then so he has to call Hanakawa for help, who is doing a beach episode all by herself in some beach on the other side of the world. And yeah, that's basically the whole episode. Like I said, I don't think there's anything deep. It's just like a cute interaction between two characters, almost doing slice of life stuff, but in the typical Shaft Monogatari-esque fashion. Koyomi Seed involves Araragi running into Yotsugi Ononoki, who tells him that she is looking for something and then convinces him to go around town looking for something with him, but she doesn't tell him what that thing is. The first half of the episode, because the Koyomimonogatari episodes are always divided into 2 halves, takes place during the Hitagi end arc, and Hanakawa discusses that probably what was happening was Ononoki was trying to make it very easy to avoid Araragi because he was very obvious while he was with Ononoki. And the second half, I believe, takes place after Tsukimonogatari, but I actually have not watched rewatched Tsukimonogatari again yet, so don't quote me on that, but I believe it takes place probably shortly after that. The purpose of this is obviously because every girl needs her own episode in Koyomimonogatari, but I think overall this one probably has more going for it than some of the other ones, even though basically nothing happens the entire episode, because I think the intention of this is to show the sort of thoughtfulness of the character of Ononoki. So I think it gives her a little bit of an aside, a little bit more characterization, and I think that's probably the intention of this. So ironically, you actually, I think, get more out of the episode where characters do literally fucking nothing than some of the episodes where they actually do something. Koyomi Nothing is an arc that starts off with Araragi in a fight with Kaganui, who he apparently challenged to a fight to try and learn how to fight, but didn't tell her this, so she just starts beating the shit out of him. I honestly think that the idea of Araragi learning to fight so he doesn't need to use his vampire powers is a very good idea, and he should definitely look into it. I do think if he wanted to learn how to fight from Kaganui, he probably should have just asked how to fight from Kaganui. I also think that there was probably a 0% chance she was going to fucking teach him anyway, and really, he should have probably just joined his sister's dojo, because that makes like 100 times more sense than what he actually did. But I think the spirit of what he attempted to do was genuine, and I think it was a good idea. Regardless of that, he then asks a question about the nature of the relationship between Kaganui and Ononoki, and then basically gets rejected, but challenged to another duel by Kaganui, who he shows up for to the duel, and she's missing, because this one ends on a cliffhanger that leads directly into the next arc. Koyomi Dead is an arc where we find out that Kaganui actually disappeared like a month ago, and I actually thought that the previous arc led directly into this one, and I guess it actually does, because this is the arc immediately following Koyomi Nothing, but it is worth noting that I literally thought that the next scene was what this entire episode was about. Regardless, Araragi goes to the North Shirohebi Shrine the morning he is supposed to be taking his college entrance exams. And Senjo Gahara says to him, I don't know if this was the last episode or this one, that he has the scores to pass, he just needs to actually show up to the exam. And that's when he encounters one of my favorite characters in the entire series, Izuku Gaien. Gaien talks to him about the disappearance of Kaganui and how she was removed from play by someone. Apparently, the person wasn't able to fully take out Ononoki, so they did the next best thing and took out Kaganui through some unknown method. Regardless of that, we do get clips through this conversation between Araragi and Izuku, one of which basically confirms the survival of Kaeki, because we see him like walking through the streets all bandaged up. We get shots of all of the other characters throughout the entire series. We even get a shot of Koyomi's mom, of Araragi's mom at one point, as she's like riding a bus. And we also hear Izuku say something very important, which is that she does not know where Oshino Meimei is, which confirms something that I've sort of speculated and I think reframes the course of the series, which is that Izuku does not actually know everything, because at the very least, she does not know where Oshino is, which means she's just the best informed, most intelligent of the oddity specialists. She's like the top dog, but she's not absolutely invincible. And I do think that recontextualizes the contest between her and Ogi, even though I will say that Ogi stood basically no chance of fucking winning. Regardless, we don't know who removed Kaganui, but if you're paying half attention to the series, you know who removed Kaganui. You know it was Ogi, you know she's been manipulating things from the shadows, and you sort of know where this is going. We also get to set up that Izuku has been planning for a very long time, probably since the events of the town have started fucking up, where she comments how there's no god of the town, there's no deity inhabiting North Shirohebi Shrine, especially now that Nadeko has been taken out of the picture. And so there is that's basically why things are so crazy in the town, is because there's a lack of an overseeing deity to prevent the oddities from going crazy. And she does this as an analogy through shogi, where she comments that neither side have any kings, so there's no real win or loss state at this point. And so she has decided that she herself is going to make a move, and she is going to try and limit the movements that Ogi can make, possibly even completely stop Ogi. And this is what she says. I don't fully believe this, because even if she doesn't know everything, she's pretty fucking close to it. So she decides to try and limit Ogi's movements as best she can by killing Araragi, which is what happens in this fucking episode, is that she takes the Apparition Killer sword that she made from the Apparition Killer's armor, and she fucking murders him. And the only other thing we get is a little clip at the end where we get to see the reappearance of one Mayoe Hachikuji. Twitch and Discord in the description. I've been Sacrobolic, your envoy of hope. Bye-bye.